Okay, I think we can get started. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Rami Yacoub. I'm the executive director of the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, also known as TIMEP. In partnership with the Noor Theatre Company and Most Resource, TIMEP is proud to welcome you all to the second installment of the MENA representation in the Western Storytelling series. In the first event of the three-part series, our panelists examined the manner in which Arab and Middle Eastern artists are represented within film, theater, and TV, and addressed some of the insurmountable challenges that face MENA artists in the global north. The conversation further centered around the struggle MENA artists go through and are portrayed in authentic, genuine way within Western media without dismissing the complex lived experiences of these artists. In this series' second event, Time plans to further explore the diversity within the MENA artistic space itself. Too often in the MENA region is portrayed as a one-size-fits-all culture, when in reality it is a diverse and rich region. Not every MENA artist is of the same ethnicity, religion, or tribe. There are more languages spoken in the MENA region than just the broken Arabic that we hear far too often in TV shows and films. Even though we're limited on time, and this is such a vast topic, we hope that today is yet another conversation starter in the policy community. And hopefully, we can see what can be done about this misrepresentation that these groups face. Um, Further, we hope that today's event will provide a candid conversation about how these groups might make tangible progress for equitable treatment in the industry, especially in leadership and technical positions that are crucial to generating lasting change. Accordingly, we ask all of our audience to ask questions through the Zoom questions feature. With that said, allow me to introduce our amazing panelists. And please note, these amazing people's bios do not cover everything that they've accomplished. We'd be here all day if we have to read all of it. So first, we're joined by Fadi Kirko. Fadi is a New York-based actor born and raised in Cairo. Fadi's notable appearances include roles in Showtime series Ray Donovan and the Netflix hit series Russian Doll, to name a few. Fadi also is notably of Armenian and Palestinian and Egyptian descent. Amr Waked. Amr is an Egyptian film, television, and stage actor, traditionally best known in Hollywood for his role in the 2005 Syriana, but other prominent roles include um, many things in, for example, Lucy, and obviously his role as Farouk Hassan in the Rami Hulu TV series. Nabra Nelson. Nabra is a community organizer and theater creator from Egypt, Nubia, and California, as well as a director of arts engagement at Seattle Rep. She's a founding member, company member of the MENA-focused theater company Dunia Productions Seattle. And one of the most things I love about her is her amazing podcast, Kunafa and Shay. Mike Musalem is a producer, director, writer for theater, film, and television. His feature film, Breaking Fast, based on the short, had its world premiere at the Scenic Quest Film Festival in March 2020, going on to play 65 plus festivals. Amazing show. Everyone has to see it. With that said, I'd like to welcome you all and welcome our guests. Again, I've shortened the bios to the best of my ability, and we're going to discuss them further. Fadi, let me start with you. I wanted to ask you a quick question here. Being Egyptian from an Armenian and Palestinian descent, what are the challenges and hurdles that you face when you getting casted in MENA roles by MENA creatives? And I think you are muted, Fadi. Sorry.
There it is. All right. Thank you for having me, of course. This is a pleasure to be part of. Um, you know, it's really hard. There's so many battles and hurdles that we deal with every day as actors or as artists. My biggest issue, I think, which is a good and a bad thing, whether it's a MENA creative or a non-MENA creative, is that well, I guess it's more for people that are non-MENA creative, is putting that I'm fluent in Arabic on my resume. It's automatically looked at as, oh, we can bring him into the stereotype role. It's never, oh, what is, we're in an industry where it's on the surface is how you look, and it's not what you are really. Sometimes I don't tell people I'm Armenian Palestinian because it could lessen my chance of getting a different kind of role. Like sometimes I think about how nice it would be to just get a different kind of stereotype instead of always
Yeah.
being stereotyped as an Arab or as an immigrant of whatever sort. And then sometimes there is the stereotype roles, but like those are the good ones that like sometimes you don't find. Like it's always like a serious like bad guy all the time for an Arabic role. It's never like a fun bodega worker. Like even a bodega worker in New York is like, and for people that don't know what a bodega worker is, it's like a little convenience store clerk. You know, a character like that could be fun, and you can take a role like that and feel good about it. Um,
Do you
I think it's really sometimes I feel like I need to take off of my resume that I speak fluent Arabic, and
do
sometimes
you
I don't.
yeah. So do you let me ask you this. Do you ever find like nuanced roles like when you're looking at even whether it's I mean obviously some Arab creatives are more nuanced than others, but let's just look at the general topic, if you will. Do you ever find these roles that are that nuanced when it comes to describing the culture or the ethnicity of like or the diversity of ethnic roles within the MENA community? Like for example, like is there any consideration that there are Armenians living in the Middle East, that the Middle East is not just one unique ethnicity? Do you ever see that?
I mean, I see it. I don't think bless the casting directors when they do their job, but sometimes it's out of their hand. You know, the bigger heads don't see that, and the casting directors, some of them don't know that. It's our job as actors, and honestly it's more like who represents you, like your manager and agent. You know, I have, thank God, I have a good manager who is all about diversity, and she's a lawyer, and she types emails to these heads at like, you know, big channels and networks, and tells them this is wrong. You know, when can I bring in Fadi to play just a lawyer? When can I bring, you know, Ahmed to play, you know, whatever, a doctor, a longer, like, you know, a guest star or a recurring star, not just one day on, you know, and that's it, a stereotype character.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I think the problem is that people don't do enough research. And, you know, you mentioned in the last time about Tyrant, you know, for example, there's a lot to it, man. There's deadlines, there's money, there's all that stuff, and you know the bigger heads don't care about that stuff. They just want to meet the deadline, make the money, and you know pop the next project. No one wants to get authentic about these things. Like no, if you say Egyptian, you know it's so funny because even some of us we're so used to think in a stereotypical way that like even when we meet someone, like when someone meets me, they're like, "You're Egyptian," and it's
yeah.
like, yeah,
That
I have a little
stereotype.
bit of Egyptian, but then I'm Armenian and I'm Palestinian. They're like, oh, I would have never thought that. And it's like, well, it's because
Yeah,
people just what they see on TV is what they think is it. And yeah, it's a struggling battle for a lot of us, and there's a long way, and it's not just us MENA actors. There's people before us, and you know, Latinx
of course.
and
Right. Yeah.
African Americans and so on and so forth. So it's it's tough too. And like when MENA creatives are writing, they also want to make sure because like we're all trying to make it and we're all trying to take that one step. And one step it takes a while for some of us, and to uplift everybody with us, it's hard because you're trying to make it. Everybody's journey is different, and
Sure.
when you're writing, you're trying to also sort of cater to some of that Western audience because they don't know better, but somehow sneak in and change it. And the more the more you change it around and show them that, oh, there's this type. Oh, okay. I always thought it was this way. It's nice to see that, but it's gonna be it's we're
Yeah. No. Of
progressing.
course. Like, absolutely. And thanks for that, Fedi. Let me jump to you real quickly. And I think, aside from my admiration, much respect for you, you're also been, and then this is not an overstatement, you've been blessed with a wonderful career and you've been successful in not just one continent, but three at least. And I wanted to ask you, since you've had that opportunity as one of the breakthrough, Middle Eastern artists, if you will, um, from what you see in writing rooms and on locations, things and projects, having worked in, obviously Middle East, Europe, and North America, what are the communities that you mostly noticed to be marginalized or overlooked or underrepresented in either the MENA creative rooms or in Western projects. I wanted to ask if you have some thoughts on that.
I think it's the whole concept, like Ferry was saying, it's the whole function of a MENA personality in a Western production. And what does that serve? And why are they putting a MENA character in the first place? And once you have these questions answered, you start seeing the proper shape of what you are doing. And yes, there are so many bad opportunities that come your way, but at the same time, there are other ones that you can pick and enlarge and live with that conviction that yes, we are different. We are human beings. We deserve to be represented for what we are and who we are. And I was just making an interview a couple of days ago with this Spanish journalist, and that's where I realized that basically we are history writers. We write our own history from the perspective of human beings. We are not just people who come and play a role. No, we are creating a reality, and this reality outlives us as well. So I think it is our responsibility as artists as well to try as much as possible to stick to what is real, what is functioning better for you and where you come from, and what can you do to influence this positively, even if you want to criticize it. I mean, look at Rami, for example. That was a brilliant script. They've cracked how to represent a MENA personality and still take the piss out of it without trashing it, and at the same time show that we are integrable beings. We're people that integrate. We're people that have every single human value that everybody else has. And I think this is where the key is. Why are you bringing MENA personalities in your script? Is it to piss on them? Then you will bring the terrorists, and whoever is the good guy in your movie will be the guy telling on the terrorist. But hey, I lived all my life in Egypt, all of it, until 40 something years old. And I have never in my life talked to a terrorist. I have never in my life seen a terrorist. Not the sheer vast, that the only majority that I have seen in my life in that region of the world are very normal people who want to laugh, want to live, want to have ambitions in their lives, and are non-violent whatsoever. So I think this is a question that should be posed to the producers and the distributors. Why are you making this awareness in our history? Because this is not, if you pick now a movie from our time and you would think that, oh, the Middle East are a bunch of people who have guns and are blowing each other up all over the place. And that's not the truth. Maybe there's a very small fraction that is doing that, but it's not all of us. And I think this is where our job as artists is important. What you accept to do, what you accept to, what angle of the story you want to support. And we are here because there are people who are playing these roles and are feeding this kind of image. It's time that we say, look, that is not correct. Like Fadi was just saying, go do your research and come back with a better version, and then we can work.
Yeah, no, definitely. Fully agree with both of you. And I will say last, just to be also not hard on young Middle Eastern and North African actors and filmmakers and producers and artists. Last event we had a lot of comments saying, a lot of the attendees were, artists were up and coming and brilliant young folks, and they're like, we're trying to balance, obviously getting the roles that are honest and true to our identity, but we gotta eat sometimes, we gotta work sometimes, we gotta get the experience. So I get, you're absolutely right. And I'm grateful for things that, this generation, the generations before, things like Rami and Breaking Fast and other great shows that have been like kind of trailblazers, if you will. And we'll get to discuss that a little bit more. But Nabra, I want to get to you really quickly, and I want to discuss your amazing podcast. And I want to ask you, through your work on your podcast, theater dramaturgy, and community organizing, what are some of these traps that young or not so young, even mid-career MENA creatives fall into when they're trying to challenge these stereotypes or or things of the sort? If you can talk to us about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Amr and Fadi, you bring up really incredible points. And yeah, so something I talk about in my podcast actually a lot is that there's really kind of no winning for MENA artists in some ways, especially writers. Because if you think about if we want to write about our home countries in the Middle East, for instance, say an Afghani writer wants to write about Afghanistan, if they write about the war, then it's, potentially perpetuating, the overwhelming narratives about war in Afghanistan and kind of, the abundance of that we see, even if they're bringing nuance to it. But if they don't write about it, they're ignoring it and they're putting it, they're seeing it through rose-colored glasses. And then you see, when it comes to the stereotypes, there's the ones that Amr and Fedi have brought up. There's, of course, the overwhelming, terrorist stereotype that we see all the time. But there are a lot, actually, in my research for this podcast and in reading a lot of scripts and watching a lot of films and things like that recently, there are a lot of really specific stereotypes for Middle Eastern and North African, specifically characters that are very bizarre but are really prevalent across art and media. You have our own kind of version of the virgin horror dichotomy. You have the, sexy exotic belly dancer woman, or the really prudent mahagaba, veiled Muslim woman who is, oppressed by some man, usually her husband. And along with that, you have if you see a husband, Arab man in a family, usually they are violent in some way. And then even I was talking about the cool Muslim stereotype that's come out of kind of like the 2010s, kind of, there was that wave post 9/11 of lots of terrorism on screen, but then there was this attempt to correct this and to humanize Arabs, and this cool Muslim stereotype started to come up a lot, which is the Muslim who drinks and eats pork and it's just cool, and so we can hang out with them, non-Muslims and Americans can hang out with this Muslim Arab person. That's so exciting. Of course, these are all elements of people's personalities, but I'm seeing these prevalently in a lot of different media, and so there's just this overwhelming amount of stereotypes that are just not nuanced, and of course there are elements of these characters that exist in all of us, of course in the US and MENA communities, but the problem is, going to Amr's question of why are you putting this character in there, the way I have answered that most of the time is to make some type of political statement instead of to have this a fully fleshed out, character that we can relate to and examine, and to have their own kind of world. So there's some type of political statement in almost every MENA character I see on screen, which is really frustrating.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you for just one moment? Because actually, I think you're touching on something that's really interesting here. I think, do you feel that this overcorrection that happened, the AKA Cool Arab in 2010s, was that kind of the overcompensation of guilt, perhaps, but that was not done or researched by Middle Eastern, North African artists, but rather also still perhaps kind of it's imposed on the community? Do you feel that this is the case?
I think yes, partially, and all of this I think are traps that definitely non-MENA writers mostly fall into, but also MENA writers. And and I think it comes from, to really answer your question directly, this idea of humanizing Arabs is very tricky. And again, we talk about this on the podcast, which is like, you know, MENA folks have been dehumanized through media, you know, not just since 9/11, but way before that. And it's been constantly dehumanized, dehumanized, dehumanized. And our whole existence has been politicized. And I think that's where the no winning comes from, is that our entire existence as people is politicized. Everything we do, is saying something, whether we want to or not. And so, you know, there's this attempt to humanize us, and whether by ourselves, our own communities, or by non-MENA folks, which is really important, and that needs to happen. However, there are, again, traps to that. There's the kind of overcorrection in some cases in which you're not actually showing the nuance. You're not humanizing that which is dehumanized, but showing, I actually support cool Muslim,
Yeah.
that's a real thing. But you're not actually humanizing Muslims who are religious. You're still saying those are, if you're really religious, you might still be a terrorist. So, but there are also the cool Muslims. And then, there are also I've been seeing a lot of writers, MENA writers who, in an attempt to share a humanizing narrative, just the plots fall flat, because when we're working so hard to just show something that is wholesome and that is simple and that is digestible for non-MENA audiences, the nuance that we have inside of us, the true narratives, the complexity, aren't portrayed. And so actually some of the scripts that I've read are kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's nice. It shows that Arabs are human, but I know that. So this isn't a really interesting story. This is only interesting for people who don't think that Arabs are human. And so, I think that I'm also a writer. And so what I've been trying to do is to write for MENA audiences. I want to see a lot more of that, because whether consciously or subconsciously, and I think usually it's subconscious, we're writing for white audiences, because those are the audiences we see, especially in theater, when we're seeing our audience, and we're seeing a lot of white people in those audiences every single day. That's who immediately comes to mind. And so I found myself falling into that trap as a writer, that I'm explaining a little too much, and I try to constantly remind myself, if my entire audience were other MENA folks, would I say this? Would I explain this? Would I translate that bit of Arabic? And I think about it, and you're like, oh, well, but will people really understand? Are you alienating people? And I think about my experience going to a Christmas carol for the first time. I'm Muslim, and I was raised in a Muslim country. I was raised in Egypt. And I went to a Christmas carol, which is considered, universal. It's the big Christmas show. I celebrate Christmas, so it should be something that I can relate to. And I just left thinking, like, oh my gosh, that was so Christian. And there were a lot of little bits that I didn't understand, because I don't go to church. I didn't read the Bible. I don't understand these references, but it's fine, because this is for Christian audiences, is for, Euro-American audiences. And so a lot of it's just not explained, and other people can come. If you're not Christian, that's fine. I want my plays to be for MENA audiences. And if you're not MENA, you can come, you'll get it. It's fine. You don't need to understand everything. And I want to see so much more of that, for our own edification, for our own, so that we can lean into complexity without catering to white audiences, without trying to humanize ourselves with no winning. And so we need more MENA narratives from all perspectives, whether by or not by MENA writers, although ideally by MENA writers. The more we have, the less one writer, one person, one producer has the weight of the world to actually represent or to correct all of history. And part of that is making sure that there's enough funding. And that's where that specific funding for MENA and BIPOC narratives is so important, because we have a history to address. We need to flood the market with new complex narratives so that we can really address this long complex history of dehumanizing and one-sided narratives. And if you're in a producing room, it's so important, especially if you're non-MENA, to bring MENA narratives and stories and scripts to the stage, because I find myself, I'm on a season planning at Seattle Rep. I help pick our season. And, you know, I find myself, thankfully there are other MENA folks in season planning, which is amazing. But, you know, I find myself trying to whittle down that one script that I can bring to say, this is going to be perfect for us. Because otherwise, when I keep throwing MENA scripts, I become that, you know, that MENA person who keeps bringing MENA scripts, and but they're not all great. So, you know, whatever. But so there's this like navigation that I have to do as a producer as well, as a MENA producer, to make sure that I'm playing the game within a white space. And so if you're non-MENA, that you have a lot of power in bringing those narratives to say this, and to check with your MENA folks to say, hey, can you take a look at this script to see if there are any big pitfalls? But that advocacy is so, so important, and funding.
Absolutely. No, but thank you so much. Before I move on to Mike real quickly, I just want to make a quick announcement. We're joined by our fifth panelist, Hashim Hassan. Thank you for joining us, man. We're really glad to have you. Just a very quick note about Hashim. Hashim received a BA in Middle Eastern Studies from UC Santa Barbara and his MFA in directing from the American Film Institute in LA. Following the release of his award-winning Sudanese short film, A Handful of Dates, Hashim began working as a freelancer video producer in California's Central Valley while pursuing music video and film projects. Welcome, Hashim. Thanks for having us. And one more quick announcement before I move on to Mike. For our audience, please feel free. I'm seeing some questions coming in, but please feel free to ask more questions. We can direct them to our panelists once we're done with our first round of questions. Mike, thanks for waiting. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate being here. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I'm a big fan of Breaking Fast, to be honest, I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of biased here, but through your work as a long-term producer and creator of the show, what are the opportunities and challenges that came across when telling a story that represents a complex yet very nuanced intersectional identities, story, if you will? And I wanted you to kind of perhaps tell us more and tell the audience about that experience, if you will, in your own words.
Sure. It was a pleasure waiting. I mean, everybody who's spoken has spoken so eloquently and so wonderfully about, the specificity of what it means to be a MENA artist. And I'm very honored to be here and honored to be in everyone's company. I think like so much of what I'm hearing and so much of how I feel actually is less about the external, and it's more for me about the internal. It's about what we feel about ourselves and where did we learn that? Did we learn that because somebody else told us that that's how we are, or is that our experience? And especially when it relates to Breaking Fast, which is is obviously a very, very personal and dear project to me, amongst all the others that I've worked on. I think the minute I was able to put it down, the minute I was able to say, this is a story about gay, Arab, Muslim, practicing Muslim, cool and practicing Muslim man, specifically living in West Hollywood, California, and was able to very sort of articulately and confidently speak about what that experience is like, people were on board. I mean, I think like the more specific a story it was, the more universal the themes emerged and the more people could actually relate to what, regardless of whether or not they were part of the LGBTQ plus community, or if they were Arab, or if they were Muslim. That intersectionality that comes about specifically within the the film was sort of irrelevant to the audiences that found relation to it. And I think so much of telling that story was a result of myself feeling confident in the story that I had to tell. And so much of the actors that we worked with, and I'll be very frank, especially with this family, this group of family, you know, look, I was an Arab American Muslim film writer director making a film situated very firmly in an Arab American world where the characters were Lebanese, the characters were very specifically rooted in a type of culture. So I was not going to, you know, I knew that I had to do this right because there have been so many opportunities for Hollywood to do it right. And they, you know, and, you know, Rami is very lucky. Rami has Rami at the helm of it. And, you know, and there is a central voice there that's sort of saying, well, this is exactly what this needs. And I felt the same sort of, on a much smaller scale, the same sort of pressure to make sure to represent correctly and understand that I was representing like a very small portion of a vast amount of stories to tell. So I was going to cast authentically Arab actors, as much as I could authentically LGBTQ actors, as much as I could authentically Muslim actors who didn't require a lot of explaining. And so much of the joy of making that project was working in and amongst a community who totally got the pacing and the nuance and totally understood the jokes and, you know, the mother character understanding exactly what it means to be sort of overbearing and completely nurturing at the same time. And just not having to sort of explain myself, being on a set and being able to speak in Arabic and English and yell at an actor in Arabic and understand that that was really my way of giving him a big hug. And, you know, there was so much sort of cultural influence on the way that I did that work, and that work was received back to me. That felt so good. And all of that comes down to what story was I ready to tell and stand confident in telling. I think about what Fadi was saying a lot, and I think about the way in which Arab actors who came into the room came in, how they showed up, and we saw so many Arab actors who it felt to me like they were walking into a room of white people and they had to act a certain way to white people. And, you know, so often I would have to say like, hey, this is a comedy. Like, you can be funny, you can relax. You don't have to, I know you're used to walking into a room and everything is heavy. This is not heavy. This is Julia Roberts, like, just smile, have fun. And I think like that there was such a, like, you would watch shoulders like go down and people take a collective sigh of relief going, oh God, somebody sees me, or I don't have to sort of put on this white lens of myself. And then I started to think, well, people must actually start to believe that about themselves because there's been so much told to them that that's how they are or need to be. So I think it's a matter of, it's a sort of a combination of a lot of things. There's this triangulation amongst performers, content creators, and then the studios that are greenlighting projects, both on the theater side or on the film side, where I think like there needs to be more of a push of ownership in the MENA story from the MENA artist in wherever they fall in the triangulation to push back. I think Ahmed was talking about this, to say, no, like, why is this here? Why is this way? And if it's a project that doesn't suit us, we go out and we trust that we can create our own, and we can really stand on our own history and do what we have to do to tell our own stories. I think waiting around for someone else to get it right will be our downfall. And there's such a prolific amount of content creators from the MENA region who are telling their own story and have a story to tell. And there are thousands upon thousands more stories to tell.
Mike, thank you so much for sharing this. Really awesome. Thank you so much. Before we move on to Q&A, I want to actually ask Hashim a very quick question, and it's something that we want to touch on in this event particularly. Hashim, if I may, through your experience, how can MENA creatives, through powerful storytelling, change the internalized biases within our own communities, whether it's like racism or religious discrimination or anti-Blackness or sexism? Do you have thoughts on that you can share with us?
Yeah, first of all, sorry I'm late, guys. I had some issue with the timing, and I just want to say that what everybody's been talking about right now, they've been saying it in a very articulate manner, and I tend to agree with a lot of what's already been said. In terms of internalized biases within the community, I think it's really up to the artists to decide how they want to approach that. I think that some artists are willing to be more provocative in terms of challenging certain narratives or ideas that are prevalent in the community, whether that's patriarchy or what have you. But I also think that other artists choose more subtle ways of challenging the narrative. For example, with my own film, A Handful of Dates, I was looking at my own relationship with my father. I grew up in the US to a Sudanese father, a Mexican mother. And in many ways, my dad was very traditional in wanting his children to adopt certain cultural practices that were, prevalent in the home country. And, one of the things that I explored through this film was that relationship between the generations, the conflict between some of the older generation and the younger generation. And this specific story was not overt in its challenging of that. It was more subtle. And that was the choice that I took in terms of challenging, some of the more traditional aspects of how, you view whether it's, commerce or the way that men and women deal with each other or whatever it is. I think I like this story because it explored this theme in a much more subtle way. It wasn't overt, it wasn't necessarily provocative. But other MENA artists, are more confrontational with their approach, and I think that's effective too. So I think that we need to create a space for all of that. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. But we do have a lot of internal biases also. I mean, we have to acknowledge that. And this is something that we all struggle with. All cultures do, and so are our cultures. Let me jump into a couple of questions here. We have a great question from Ambassador Cynthia Schneider. So the question is, and I think I'm gonna maybe perhaps ask Amr to jump on that question here. What is the impact that the panelists in general think of the growing popularity of non-English speaking shows on streaming channels, especially Netflix? And are there MENA produced shows available in the US that you would recommend? Let's kind of split the question into two portions. I know you've worked with a lot of you're currently also working on a Spanish language show, I believe. And obviously worked on a lot of shows in in Arabic and in English and bilingual. But what are your thoughts as even just an artist who is watching these streaming services? What are your thoughts on the benefit of this kind of growing market of non-English language-based shows in the United States and elsewhere?
I think all of these shows are like a meal of the culture. You know what I mean? It's like going to the place without really going yourself, but bringing the place to you in your living room and watching how people in Africa live, for example, and watching how they interact and what kind of problems and what kind of solutions they propose. So I think there's this whole cultural thing about making these shows. It kind of makes the bridges shorter, and we find the population of the world more accessible. This is how I think we talk to each other as populations. You make a bunch of movies that talk about your issues and your things, and then they make a bunch of movies about their issues and their things. And then if we just watch these movies before we talk, and then we know each other, you know what I mean? And I think this is the main function of this art in society. It's tell our stories. I understand that there's a gap missing, or there's a link missing between the maker and the audience when it comes to making shows of different cultures. And I think this is a phase we are in at the moment, because we, as many were saying, we cannot, take out the lens of the Occidental lens, or the Western lens of how we perceive things, you know what I mean? Which brings us to the other question, whether there are Arabic shows that are going to be good to show on Western platforms. As far as I'm concerned, I've worked on one show that could function. It's a horror show called Abwab al-Khawf, and it is an attempt to create a local horror, actually, not inspired by the Western lens. On the contrary, actually very well researched in the culture of horror and fear in the Arab society, Egyptian in particular, which is very superstitious. And it has a collection of nice 10 episodes that could actually show you certain angles that you wouldn't see about the culture if it was for other shows.
Yeah, no, definitely. I will say, Web will hope for Doors of Fear. It was definitely ahead of its time. Particularly, also, it was that kind of the 10 episode situation, and certainly, yes, inspired of like the whole horror genre, but certainly very authentic when it comes to Egypt. And I actually been seeing a lot of people talking about it recently on Twitter as well. It's making kind of like a cult classic comeback, which is really cool.
It keeps growing. It keps growing.
Yeah, I hope that we might have one or two individuals from some streaming organizations that are joining us today. Hopefully you're listening. Just throwing that out there. So we have another question. Sorry,
before you go on,
please,
I'll jump on that as
yes.
well. To add to what Amr said, first of all, I'm so excited to check that out because I love horror. And I've been recently diving into Arabic language shows on Netflix because I didn't actually know it was there before some of my Arab friends started telling me that. And I was like, why didn't I know this? I need to practice my Arabic. I haven't lived in Egypt for 10 years. And it's been like so exciting because I'm recommending these to so many people. I've been watching Paranormal, which is also a horror show that, and I've watched Jinn, which is so interesting because it's a show about young people who that is based in Muslim spiritual or mythology, but goes a little bit paranormal with that as well, which is exciting because it's, again, I'm able to kind of contextualize that for folks who don't know that. And somebody told me about Disappearance, which is kind of a thriller that's a Ramadan show. So I tell people about Ramadan dramas, and it's just this like amazing way to access my culture for folks who aren't a part of my culture, that is so fun and nuanced and complex. Like, I just love talking about these shows. They get to hear Arabic. My friends who are learning Arabic have a way to practice it. I have a way to practice it. I also tell them about, I'm watching Paranormal because it has Egyptian Arabic subtitles. So I'm telling them about the difference between Fusha and modern standard Arabic and Egyptian Arabic, and why I'm watching this and why I'm not watching this, and why I don't really understand Jinn when they speak in Jinn because it's Jordanian Arabic, but I understand Paranormal. And so this media just gives people such an exciting, complex lens, and to have them on streaming services where I can just tell someone to check it out, it has been amazing for the past several months since I've dived into this. And there's so much more than just the nuance of the plot itself. It's the history behind it. It's when it came out in Egypt, whether it was Ramadan or not, and talking about how Cairo is the Hollywood of the Middle East, and also seeing the incredible quality of these shows and showing people, like, I mean, that by itself, someone tuning in and saying, oh my goodness, this is just like any show, you know, on HBO or whatever, on TV in the US, that by itself is breaking stereotypes, because there's this idea that Africa, especially, you know, especially Africa, as somebody from North Africa, is, you know, lower quality, or they don't have as much money, or they don't have as much, you know, as much art or culture or whatever, that we're ancient or something of that sort. And so even just like this incredibly good quality work that looks like shows that we would see in the US on television is amazing. And I actually found myself like so excited when somebody in one of the shows in Paranormal just like walked out into the streets of Egypt at night, and I was like, that is what Cairo feels like at night. It doesn't feel like, you know, like walking into temples, which is what you see about Egypt. You see people walking in a desert in some type of very like ancient Egyptian location. No, it feels like cars beeping and getting into taxis and these kind of that exact staircase and that exact elevator. And so it's a way to share our culture in a way that's so deeply true to us. So we need more of these. We need shows that in different languages, especially that convince people to watch shows in another language with subtitles, which is not the default I found of especially Euro-American friends. So yeah, I love this question, Cynthia. Thank you.
Anybody else have thoughts on this? Perhaps I wanted to, I'm not sure if I'm lost here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we're all muted, but yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Sorry. No, I just wanted to make sure because everyone got frozen on my screen. I wanted, so there's another question that we always get asked, and it is one that you know, I understand. I've gotten 3 private messages on this, and there's one on the Q&A as well. A lot of you know, aspiring, you know, filmmakers and artists are asking, what should they be looking for in an agent? Finding an agent is hard. Getting a lot of these questions. So who would like to give some advice on this? So perhaps ask all of you to give your quick 2 cents on it, if you will, from your different perspectives.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay, go ahead.
Meet as many agents as you can before you actually take one. That's the key. See who's available in the market. And it's really, I think this industry, yes, it's about the art and the content and everything, but what actually makes this industry roll, it's the human relationships that you have in it. And that is your agent. That's someone where you believe, who's honest with you. He's not going to tell you lies to make you feel happy about yourself. Just someone that will get you the right job that you need and will get you to do it as well. So it depends really how you feel with the agent. Some of them can be really big and great, but personally, you don't have a thing, you know what I mean? You don't click for some reason. And that's an agent that will sink you, no matter how huge they have and arms and many departments and all of that. So look for someone that you trust personally and look for many of them and then choose the right one. That's my advice.
I just want to add to that. I couldn't agree with that more, especially the personal connection. I think, you know, your agent becomes an extension of what you have to offer to the industry, and that person will be an ambassador to what you bring to the table and is not going to sell a person who isn't the person that you are. So I think it's a matter of finding someone who aligns with what you want to do and who you are in the industry, beyond just your ethnicity, your race, your religious affiliations, your sexual identity. You know, it's well beyond those great check marks that are very buzzworthy right now. But I would also add to that is that and this is just because it needs to be said, not because you don't know this, but no agent is going to make your career if you don't make it for yourself. No agent is a fairy godmother or a fairy godfather. You are going to do the work, and your agent is going to support the work you do. So don't get an agent and then think, great, I can sit back, because it probably is the time to accelerate what you do and what you bring to the table.
Thanks, Mike. Fedi, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm blessed. Like, thank God, I have a great agent. I think a lot of people also forget that you need a team. I don't think it's just an agent. I think a manager is very important to have. A manager really manages your career. This is from my experience, of course. And like Amr was saying, is you gotta find someone that connects with you. And I'm using my manager because I connect with her very well. And it's this constant battle of finding you jobs, but I do my part. You got to do your part. You got to be prepared. You got to take audition technique classes. You got to make sure that you are doing the homework. And like Mike said, it's up to you to get the job. The agent or the manager is really just linking you, is the link between you and that job. And yeah, I mean, I think a personable relationship is very important with that person, knowing that they know exactly what you want. I in the beginning had a lot of issues trying to figure out what characters can I fit for, and then as time progressed with my team, you start realizing, yes, I can do this, yes, I can do that. As long as you're both on the same page, it's going to work out. And remember, at the end of the day, it's business. Everybody's trying to make it. As personable as you can get with that person, at some point, this relationship could end and this relationship could continue. And in the end, we're in a business where you can't take anything personal. So
yeah, that's great advice in the sense of also, it's not it's personal, but it's also, it's like, yeah, it's give and take in a business setting. I'd love to also hear Hashim and Nabra's views on this very quickly. Hashim, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm just listening attentively to what Amr, Mike, and Fadi have been talking about, because I've been working as an independent artist for the last several years. I haven't necessarily been working in Hollywood in the industry, but what everybody has said so far has made sense. I think for me right now, building a body of work that I can then use to get work is probably the most important thing. And as Amr and Fadi and Mike said, finding somebody that you can connect with and is personable, but also being willing to, walk away if necessary. But yeah, I just wanted to add that briefly. I don't have that much experience with getting agents or managers or anything, but that's what it seems like. What everybody has said is the best sort of approach, to that.
Thanks, Hashim.
Yeah.
Last but not least, Nabra, would you give us your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, I think I'm more on Hashim's side as well. I'm as a producer, administrator, independent artist, so I don't have a lot of experience with agents. But I love that what you're saying about relationships. And what I'll say is also to take this question on a slightly different perspective is the way in which other MENA artists and just the community as a whole has supported my career and we support each other's careers. I think especially the theater industry is very, very close knit. So I found a lot of that mentorship and uplifting, not necessarily through I don't have an agent specifically, so not through an agent itself, but through those relationships with other MENA folks who the more of our narratives that we see, the more of us that are in the industry, the more all of us are uplifted. And that's been a really clear kind of feeling across the communities that I've been a part of.
That's great. There's one more question actually that's really interesting, got on a private message here. What can we, as between parentheses, artists and filmmakers, producers, can do to advance? Like, what are the things that are still missing to do to advance the plight, if you will, of the MENA artist community? I know it's kind of a general and broad question. I know there has been, so let me just kind of add my thoughts on that question. We certainly have seen advancements. We cannot deny that. We've seen shows that we would have never thought to see 10 years ago on either streaming platforms or TV. We've seen the development of Arab characters and Middle Eastern characters in ways that perhaps, even though some of them are based due to guilt, if you will, as Nabra and I were kind of discussing earlier, but we've seen advancements. But what else is left more to do now? And what are the things that we can still do? And I'd love everyone's thoughts on this. So first come, first serve here. Who would like to jump in? Hashim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so something that Nabra was discussing earlier is this urge to want to humanize ourselves, because for so long we've been dehumanized in American film and media. I kind of came of age after 9/11. I went to college at that time. I saw the Iraq invasion, the war in Afghanistan. It was the first time where I felt very racialized as an Arab and Muslim, even though I'm mixed. I'm Sudanese, Mexican American. I have a Mexican mother, grew up in the US my whole life. But for the first time, I felt this need for Westerners to know that we're human, that we have complexity. And like Nabra was mentioning, I think, it's very, because so many Americans don't know these stories, we're very eager to want to show them hey, we're human too. But I think something that was interesting that Riz Ahmed brought up in one of his this recent initiative to push more Muslim representation in film was that he mentioned 3 different categories of Arab or Muslim Americans that are depicted in media. You have the sort of one-dimensional stereotypical depictions. Then you have a better depiction, which is still framed as a Middle Easterner or an Arab or a Muslim, but we're sort of giving them more humanity, which is a little better. And then there's the third category, which is like Riz Ahmed's character in The Sound of Meadow, where it's not really apparent what his ethnicity is whatsoever. And this is sort of the category that I'm most excited about, and reflects my reality as a Sudanese Mexican American more than anything. And I think that those are the types of stories that I ultimately want to gravitate towards, where it's not necessarily talking about the Middle Easterner on behalf of a Western audience, you know what I'm saying? Where it's just telling our stories naturally as they are, so.
Hey, thanks, Hesham.
Can I follow up with something? Yeah.
Yes, please, of course.
I think that the really true core issue is not really with the Western representation of MENA personalities. It's actually in our own presentation, in our own industry itself. We have an institution that's called the Authority of Censorship. And you cannot actually produce anything that this authority will disapprove of. So what can we do now? We're all artists with, let's say, a twist of origin in that region. And we all live in countries that gave us the freedom of speech and all of our rights. And it is, I think, our job now to lead the way for the local industry to follow, to start producing things with no censorship, things that are meaningful for the actual society of the Middle East and North Africa, for people who cannot put this on screen because of where they are and because of the limitations they've got. So an idea would be create a platform for this region and start telling stories that have zero interference from any dictatorship, zero interference from any religious fanatics, and just let the dice roll and see what numbers you get.
Fadi, I know you want to follow up, but just give me 1 second. I want to ask a very quick follow-up question. Because I've sat in these, with friends that are artists and producers and filmmakers, and perhaps we have friends in common in that area, if you will. But I've sat in hangouts in Cairo in the past where people were writing or working on a script, and they would self-censor, knowing this is not going to pass. No way this scene's going to pass because they're talking about the police force in that way. And I think, if I may reflect on, I think a lot of us that were born and raised in the Middle East have this automated self-censorship. And I believe that's what you mean. I'm yes. Right? We want to kind of forcefully get out of this mentality, right?
Exactly. We've got to break out of that shell. We've got to not do it ourselves, because what really needs to happen is that it happens back home. You know what I mean? So we just need to trigger it somehow, maybe create something for them to compete with. And then that will be just the way it starts. And where does it go? I really don't know. But eventually, this is what we really miss. We miss freedom of expression and freedom of speech and freedom in our art altogether. And this is a way to do it. And forget about financing hell. Now we live in the world of the individual. Just something like that, you can even crowdfund it for God's sake, you know what I mean?
That's very, very true. Thank you, Ahmed. It's amazing. Actually, great idea. Fadi, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You wanted to add? Go ahead, please.
No, I mean, it's fine. It's kind of like just piggybacking off of what everyone was saying. Since you mentioned Riz Ahmed, like one of the things too, I think it's like we tend to, because, uh, for example, I forgot which newspaper, the headline, Riz Ahmed, first Muslim nominated for an Oscar, like things like that. We don't need that. You can't, I know, as I'm not Muslim, but I know Muslim friends who are proud of that. But at the same time, you are feeding into the media that way, because now it's just going to affiliate with that. And it's like, oh, the movie that he was nominated for, he didn't play a Muslim in it. And it's kind of like in the moment, it's okay. And then after that, so I think we need to also blend in. If we're going to be as part of this industry, the titles need to go away. Because we already know that, I mean, like some people know he is, but I think for the Western world, it's kind of like everybody has their own agenda. And I think we can't repost it on Facebook and on Instagram and spread that, because then you're just going to affiliate it with that all the time. So.
I'd love to understand what you mean by blend in a little bit more. Blend into whom?
It's kind of like we are moving forward, but I think once we get to a certain platform where we're like be able, where it becomes like no one looks at an Arab and say, oh, he's a terrorist or a Muslim or this, and the things that they were so used to stereotyping you with all the time. Once we get to that point, then it's like we don't need to mention these things unless it has to do, important to the story or to the person.
I understand.
So if I may, right. Go ahead, Mike. Apologies.
I was just going to say, if I'm understanding you correctly, do you mean you look forward to the day where we don't talk about someone's identity as an accolade, more so the work itself is the accolade?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I think we're all looking forward to the day where, like, sure, if someone has like a Hispanic last name and getting an Oscar, they're being recognized for their accomplishment rather than just like the fact that, oh my God, we have an individual from such and such country that is finally making it there. Then it becomes common practice. I think I skipped Nabra, right? About what we, yes, yeah, I can't do that. So please.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, y'all. I'm just like processing everything everyone's saying. All very true. And Hesham, I was giving you snaps because I agree that the narratives I love that I'm personally extremely drawn to right now are the ones where like a character just happens to be MENA and it's not, the entire story isn't about their identity. And I'm like, yes, they're just, that's most of our existence. I do talk about my identity a lot, but I'm not constantly talking about my identities. Mostly I'm like going to the grocery store and like trying to make art and going to a job and things like that. So I love those narratives. Something that has been brought up a few times here, but I really want to highlight is the importance of MENA folks behind the scenes. We talk a lot about diversifying our staffs, diversifying our writing rooms and things like that. But I don't actually think that a lot of people know why that's important and have really internalized why that's important. And it's incredibly important to know why, so that first of all, you're not tokenizing folks. And second of all, you're not just filling a quota, that you're actually being really purposeful about this, and that in your hiring, I'm a part of a lot of hiring, that you're asking these questions about, if it's about a diversity or EDI or something of that sort, not just to hear a stock answer or to, again, fill this quota, but to connect their lived experiences to the work that you're doing, and to see lived experience as essentially a resume item. That's how I see it. It's like, what, you know, especially when I think about like EDI work, I do a lot of equity, diversity, inclusion work, kind of behind the scenes in organizations. And you know, I think about how I bring my entire lifetime of lived experience to that position. That should be on my resume, versus a person, you know, especially white folks who have just, you know, started to think about this 10 years ago, which sounds like a lot. Oh my goodness, I have a decade of experience. Well, I'm like, well, I have way more than that, because since I was born, I've been thinking about identity because I'm mixed race. And so that's the shift in thought about our position behind the scenes that's really important, is the truly why, and how does it connect to the work, and how is lived experience as valid and sometimes even more valuable than the show you did or that position you held. And to highlight something that we've been talking about here, is, you know, that feeling in the room when it's a full MENA room is powerful. Like Mike was saying, that affects the art. Having a MENA writer, a MENA director, a full MENA cast with the true lived experience, there's less explaining, so you're not wasting time on explaining things. They're gonna bring, we always talk about like the extra dimension they're gonna bring to the character, of course, but it really, to take it beyond the like, you know, warm and fuzzy feelings of they're gonna bring so much authenticity to this role, it saves on time, it saves money, it's fully valuable. It makes people feel safe to have people in leadership that are part of the MENA community. And to go even further, thinking about the complexity and nuances of our region, there are certain things that really, without lived experience, you're not going to pick up on. And when I think about, like, especially with authentic casting, you know, I was just talking and discussing a play from kind of the northeastern region of the Middle East, kind of the West Africa, which is this like weird area where like Iran, Afghanistan, you know, countries that are kind of in between Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and have their own really unique identities and cultures and languages, and trying to figure out, how do we cast this? And I was talking with some of my MENA colleagues about this, and we were like, we kind of just know. I know when someone's gonna pass as Egyptian, even if they're you know, I know that like Palestinian dialect is similar to Egyptian. So if they're going to be speaking Arabic, we could probably get away with that. Egyptian is better, but we kind of know what is that going to sound like? How are they going, you know, what do the houses look like? What is the set design going? How should that feel, without doing extensive research? There's actually when it comes to the nuances of the MENA community, when it comes to art, the importance of having people behind the scenes is truly a question of time and money, as much as, you know, the warm and fuzzies of authentic representation. And that goes to casting, that goes to having someone on your season planning or your producerial team who can identify those nuances, who can identify those myriad stereotypes that people might be falling into, even MENA writers. And bring that to the forefront for discussion. These are things that would not happen at my theater company unless there were MENA folks on the producing team, on the selection team, as well as on the actual creative teams in the room, and the actors. We have to think a lot further. And just to always bring up funding is incredibly important, because, as you said, we have to eat. And so if there is enough funding, then we can actually choose what we want to do. We can, you know, we don't have to be sacrifice our morals in order to put food on our table. But also, when it comes to giving funding, if you're part of a funding organization, again, the importance of having MENA folks or BIPOC folks in that organization on staff means that we're going to bring that perspective of, again, why is it important to fund these? We understand that history we're trying to correct. We understand the pool of representation that is available in media right now, and where we need more, and where we have enough, and we have connections in the community as well. Thinking from a community engagement standpoint, I can text a bunch of people to come see this show, and they're going to see it because they're part of my community. You now have a huge audience base when you hire more BIPOC staff, because word of mouth is incredibly important to our communities. Relationship is incredibly important to our communities. So please, everyone, take a moment to really internalize why authentic representation is important beyond just the feel good of it.
Sure. Thank you, Nabra. Love that. Mike, you were shaking your head earlier, like in unison agreement with that. And I would love to hear your thoughts before. I know we're cognitive of time. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but I just want to hear your thoughts first before we do that.
Yeah, just I can't agree more that and it sort of parallels what I was saying a little earlier in terms of like having more ownership over our destiny. And I am somebody who lives in the structure of Hollywood, so like I understand who's making the choices about what shows get greenlit and who's taking pitch meetings. And I've had the privilege of working for 2 major streamers, and so I understand how those worlds are navigated. Beyond writing a show, beyond starring in a show, beyond any of those things, beyond producing, creative executives, agents, managers, studio execs, studio operations folks, having MENA people, even understanding the entire infrastructure of our industry and seeing where they might fit in any capacity, and then watching them work their way to a decision-making opportunity and position is, I very much advocate for that. I think there's so much more than just the lens that we think will get these stories across. I think there's real effective change happening in ways that we probably aren't even aware of. And I hope more people will go to the business side of things and really effectuate change.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that. That's spot on. Just to be cognitive of time, I'm probably going to have to wrap this up now. I just wanted to say that we're also getting a lot of questions in private messages about programs for connecting young artists and things of this with existing artists. And with both Most Resource and Noor Theater Company, we're going to work hard on trying to provide some of these resources in the future for up and coming artists. But before I wrap this up, I want to thank you, Nabra. I want to thank you, Amr, Fadi, Mike, Hashim, for your insights and for your time that you're volunteering today to shed some light to the policy community about what's going on. The reason why we hold these events is to bridge the gap between arts and policy. There's plenty of room to do that for. And as Amr was saying, brilliant ideas like platforms to create free voices and art that is free of self-censorship is needed. And all of your brilliant ideas and your hard work and dedication to this field is highly appreciated. This is the second part of a 3-part series. We encourage you to go back and look at and watch part 1, which was amazing. Very competitive to today's panel. And we also encourage you to share this today's panel with your friends and colleagues. We'll be sharing this online on social media. I know some people wanted to attend but could not because of the time considerations and other time commitments. And please stay tuned for the third and last of this series. And once again, thank you to our amazing panelists. Thanks to our audience. And please keep doing what you're doing. You inspire us all. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Afternoon.